All right, guys, so this is a rundown of what we've done so far the past 2 days. So we are building front-end development. We are doing front-end development using React, but we are doing that using Vite. All right, so when you install Vite using Vite for React and TypeScript, you have a structure like this where Vite has this SRC folder for you and the index.html. All right, this is the single HTML file that compiles everything for you, and then you have the package JSON file. The JSON file here, you have your app name, okay, and you have your dependencies. All right, this is dependency. This dependency are dependencies that will be deployed with application. All right. However, the dependencies that you found here under dev dependencies will not be deployed with the application. These are dependencies that your application needs to run on the local environment. Why these dependencies are dependencies the application needs to run to survive even on deployed states. You need this. All right, so when you're installing a package, please understand when the package is a dev dependency package, or if it is regular package that you need for your application to run. All right, so far we just have three dependencies: React DOM, and React Router DOM, and we have these dev dependencies all here to enable us to build our React application. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about here is the dev. If you want to run your application on the local development, you do npm run dev. And npm, like I said, is a website or repository or market space where JavaScript applications, libraries, frameworks, or packages are built by other developers that you and I can use to make our development easier. You also can build an npm package. I think I have one I built for input, I think for checking input error. So I built one npm, so you can also build. Okay, it's not difficult to do if you want to just write your JavaScript or React and publish it on npm. All right, and if when you want to deploy application, you use npm run build. All right, so when you run npm run dev, it triggers these scripts, and these scripts will run. That's basically what's going on here. All right, so let's get into the src folder. Here we have the components folder, we have the page folder. When you install Vite, it comes with some pre-made codes. You can delete those code and just have a blank page that you can work with, so you can have total control of what you're dealing with. All right, so we have the app.ts and you have the main.ts. The main.ts is your app entry point. This is where your app runs and executes the pages that you have on your application. All right, so let's see what's going on here. In order to enable us to have navigation on our system, we installed React Router DOM. It's a package from React. You can see it here. React Router DOM is a very powerful package that enables us to do proper navigation on our application. React Router DOM is somewhere around, okay, look at it here. So React Router DOM, we are importing browser router, route, and routes. These are all from React's Router DOM. It's actually from React itself. So you can see here, we are housing the browser router that is coming from React Router DOM. Then, because the browser router is going to accept React component as children, we declare it this way. You can see how it was declared here, and this is how it was closed. So if you're declaring a component that would be accepting children component, like other component to run inside it as children, it is best you declare it this way so that the children can run inside it. But if the component is not going to accept children components, you really just go ahead and declare it this way. So if you look at this one, is not accepting children directly. However, it's accepting children from element field. The element props here is accepting React components. All right. While the browser router is accepting routes as a component, and the route is accepting routes as component. While the route itself is now accepting other component that are your pages on from its element prop field. All right. So when you declare route, you indicate which one is your index page. Index page means the entry page to your application. In this case, we want home to be at the entry page. So we declare this route as index, and we pass the elements, which is expecting a React component to be home. This is how we declared it. All right, this is exactly what's going on here. So, and where is this home coming from? This home is coming from the page that I created. All right, if you highlight the home and you check it up here, you can see that it's coming from page.home. And where is it? If you look at the page component, page folder here, you can see home here. This is home. So home is simply exporting home component. So I encourage you to have your component folder where your logics runs and all of those things. So look at the component here, and this is the home folder. And the home folder, you have the home component. So this is exactly what's going on here. So nothing serious here having aside having this welcome home written here. So we exported this component, and then it was imported in the register page here, and the register page was exported as well, and the register page was imported in the app.ts and was passed here as a component to the elements prop field. And all of this navigation structure that we've designed here using browser router from React Router DOM was now exported as app, and you can see was imported in main.js right here, and Vite takes care of the rest of the magic that happens under the hood. So that is basic introduction of your component and pages relationship. So we encourage you to structure your page this way. Have your component here, write your logics, export your component, import it to your page, export your page, import it to your navigation component, export your navigation component, and import it your main.ts. That's it. So let's look at other things that are going on here. Let's talk about CSS. All right, so if you have lot of pages with complex page design, we encourage you that all your components should have their own specific CSS file. Like here we have dashboard folder having the dashboard.css and the dashboard.component.ts file. It's always good this way. When you write your CSS file, all right, then you import it. If you're going to use it here, you import it. All right, let me see where I imported one. Okay, here you can see the register.ts. Okay, let me see. All right, so I have a utility component here that has input. I have button component. Look at this button component. You can see I have utility.css file here and button.component. I simply imported the utility.component.css file, which is this. Then I can use the CSS class I declared inside the CSS file inside the component itself. This is exactly how this one works. Okay, so you can see the CSS file here. I have a button class here. Okay, and inside the button component itself, I have a class name I declared, the button class I declared in CSS file in here, and it can just take up the CSS attributes into it. That's how you use your CSS within the components. All right, you can also have your global CSS here. So if you have CSS that you want to use across the application, you can also declare them here as well. All right, so that is basically how the component is structured. Now let's talk about TypeScript file. All right, we have a utility file here, and in the utility file we are declared the type declaration file. This is basically to allow you to prepare your typings for your components, your variables that you'll be using the application. Okay, so basically that's what this is what you use this one for. So when you declare your type settings here, you can export them. You can use interface or type to declare that. You can read more about this. However, just basically you declaring your type, passing the name to it, then declaring what variables you are accepting and what type of variables you are accepting. So you can see in this case now, for instance, I have a type for our input component. I said this input attribute as the name I gave it, using interface to declare it. Then I said I'm accepting props such as type, height, width, label, custom function, custom data, and here I'm declaring the type, what these things are. Type is of input attribute, which is this one. It could be text, number, radio, checkbox, password. Height is a string, width is a string, label is a string, custom function is actually a function, custom data is unknown. When the data is unknown, it means at the time you wrote the code or you're writing it, before the code be invoked or before this function will be invoked, you don't know what type of data that would be. All right, that's what this simply means. If you don't understand this, you can ask me further question about this. All right, so that's it. Let's look at another component we wrote, which is very important component here. So we have a component called button component, and what this component does is that it allows us to have a general button design that we can import over and over again. Look at the design here, very basic design. So we have a button component here, so we can easily import and use this component over and over again. All right, so all right, so that's it. That's the components, and a very good example where we use it is in the registration component. All right, let's talk about states. You have states that are component-based states. That means those states, any data you have inside the states, inside the component cannot be accessed by another component, right? Except you want to pass it as props. We can come to that later. However, there is a way, if you have a state that more than two components will be using, it's usually encouraged or advised that you declare it as a global state. Remember, if you have data that other components are going to use, if it's getting to more than two components that are not even related, especially if they are not related, please don't pass them as props directly. However, use it as a global state so you can access it everywhere within your application. That's highly recommended. So let's say how you can set up a global state. The file we're interested in when it comes to global state is a context file. So you can create a context file where you can have two files, use context, use reducer. All right, these are just file names. So let's look at use context. And use context is simply React component as well. So here you can have your app initial states. In this place, we have this state. We have user is loading and users. The users here actually accommodates users we are registering on the application. Since we don't have a database linked to this application, we are just using memory, the JavaScript memory to store data, and they'll be available until the application refreshes. So when you refresh it, you lose everything you store inside this array, right? So when we start dealing with backend, we'll start storing data in the database, okay? But for now, let's work with this. Then we have user field that is, for now, is a null at its initial states, and its loading is false. Users for now is actually an empty array. Please, it's loading. It's not really going to work for now because we're not making any data, any API query, and I'm not setting any set timeout. So we will be using this is loading when we start dealing with the backend, or when I set up a set timeout function, all of that. But we are more interested in using to see how this works. So there's initial state for our application, and we have a type setting for it. If you check out the type setting, this is it. You just declare the type for it. So you simply check what type this is. If you go to your type declaration file and search for this, you can see it here. So user is a type of user attribute, which is simply this that you have here: username, first name, email, and password. All right. So it's either going to be a user attribute this, or it's going to be a null at any given time in the application state. Okay, we have is loading, which is boolean users, which is going to be this user object, but this time around array. So this one takes care of having registering users into the array, and this one takes care of the having a single user instance in the application. All right. So this is more like user login. When user login, we populate this field. When we register user, we populate this field. We will modify this field. When user login, we modify this particular field. When user log out, you modify this particular field. When you want to delete a user, you modify this particular field. So adding a user to the dummy database, this, removing a user from the dummy database, this, logging a user to the application, this, logging out the user from the application, this. Okay, that's basically what we did here. So if you go back to the use context, that's what we just did here. Good. All right. So we get the initial state of the application, and we now created a global use context, which you can call anything you like. Global use context is what I called it, utilizing the create context from React. The create context simply enables us to have access to the global states that are coming from the global use context provider. The global use context provider is still a component that I created. All right. It's just basically from React, enabling us to utilize React as provider. With provider concept in React, we can be able to access all of the state that are available inside this application, inside these components, and also access that state in other components. That's basically what it means. So the global context provider will be wrapping our entire application, so it becomes the parent of our entire components. So anything that is under this global use context provider would enable us to have access to the data available inside this global use context. Remember that global use context, this is it. Okay, this is the function here, and these are the states. This is a reducer function that handles the states. So we have the states here, and we have the function that updates this particular state. All right. So this is a React hook that stores states or keeps states in React. So, and it's available inside this global use context. All right. With the help of use context, we can access these states by wrapping this global context provider and make it the parent of our entire application. That way we can access the state that are available here. So we can modify these states and access these states. All right. So any application, any component that is wrapped under this global use context provider will have access to these particular states and can also modify the states from any component. That's actually how it works. Right. So we basically what we did here is pass the states. This is the states. We passed it here as a prop value, and also this dispatch, which is a function that simply updates the states. Remember, this is an array. All right, all this does is update the state. This is the state that could be an object, array, or whatever it is. It just a state. That's what it simply means. It's a variable that has values to certain variables or fields. All right, and this is a function that is used to modify this variable. All right, and to make it available to other components, we simply pass it as value here. Please remember that you're going to be accessing context.provider, and remember, when you access this, you pass value props, you're passing states, which is this state, which is basically a variable, and dispatch, which is a function that actually modifies this variable state. That's all. Modifying state simply means a state of a data. So a data can be null now, and when a button clicks, it changes from null and becomes true. When the button clicks again, changing from true and becomes false. That is, each of those transition is called states in application. All right. So we use this function to update this. And how do we do this magic? We are using a use reducer hook from React. If you look at use reducer here, you can see it was imported from React. All right. And we are passing this file called reducer here. This file called reducer is when we created it. I created it here, and it's coming from our reducer file here. Look at our reducer file here. Our reducer file here simply does the updating of our states, and after that we pass this function here. What this function simply does is update our states. Yeah, we update our states, and we export the function. All right, after exporting the function, we go to our we go to our use context here, and we pass that file, that function, we pass it into reducer hook. React handles the rest. All right, and we are simply saying that our reducer hook should simply our reducer will accept our reducer function as an argument, and accepts second parameter is going to accept is this use reducer accepting two argument. All right, here accepting reducer, which is the function that we wrote that modifies our states, and the second argument is actually the state itself, which is this state. So this is basically what it's doing here. So when we've done this here, we now have access to states becomes this. The function that updates the states becomes this logic, which is assigned to this. All right, and we pass these two values into this global context provider. Since we've passed it here, if we now go to our app entry point, you have to go to your app entry point, then you wrap your global use context around your entire application. Remember, this app is coming from the app structure here where we handled all our app navigation, right? So the entirety of our application sit on this navigation, and we exported it into the main app entry, which is this one. So instead of having just the app here, we now have to wrap the app, and the app becomes children or a child of the global context provider. The global context provider is basically this component, which with the help of use context and use reducer, we are able to access this use reducer states and use reducer function that update the states from the value props. Right. So with this, once you've done this, you can easily access all of these states. So whenever you declare states, you are simply accessing this value. Whenever you call dispatch function, this one, you're simply going to be calling my reducer function, this reducer function here. That's what you're going to be calling reducer function here. So depending on what dispatch function you're calling, whichever of this case you're calling, you're going to perform any of these functions here. We are still getting to that. All right. So that's basically what. So whenever you say state, because the use reducer accepts your user function and the initial state of your application as parameters. So you accept two parameters here. So this reducer function is basically the function we have here. What this function does is update the state. And the second parameter is simply the state. So whenever you say state, you are simply accessing this initial state data. So whenever you say state, you see user is loading users. That's why if you add the inner value here, you see state anytime you access state. That's because the first value in any of these React hook like use state and use reducer, usually the state of the value, and the second element in the array is usually the function that updates the state of that hook. All right. So this is a use reducer hook. The first element here in the array is the state of the hook. All right. And the dispatch function is usually the function that modify the states of the hook. That's what it is. Even with use states, same thing applies to use states and use reducer. All right, so that's it. That's basically what we mean by this ideology. So basically, what I now want to do is I would want to register a user and update the field. All right. So with the help of global context, we can be able to import these components, this hook now, and use it anywhere we want in our application. We'll see how that works. But let's look at use reducer. Use reducer is simply a function that accepts two arguments. It accepts one argument which I call state, another argument which I call action. All right. So what is actually the state? The state, I am saying the state is a type of our use context state, this initial state here. So it's still the same state. So we are simply saying that in use reducer, we are accessing all of these states. User is loading users, okay? Because we want use reducer, this user function is basically to update the states. So if we want to update the state, you need to have access to the states, right? Good. So what we want to do now is we have access to states, all right? And we have an action that we also have a data type for. Look at action here. Action, when you check your type declaration, is simply an object I declared. Okay, it's an object, and the object will have a field called type, and it will also have a field called payload. So not all of them have type and payload. Not all of them have payload, but all of them usually have type. All right. So here the type field is important for you. The payload is when you're expecting to pass data to the reducer function. If you're not passing data to the reducer function, you can just declare type. All right. In this case now, we will just want to update the state of the loading. So here you can pass a name, you can declare name. This is just an event name. So choose any event name of your choice. This is I just chose this. You can choose anything of your choice. Just make sure that when you're choosing this name, if you want to modify it, it has to be the same name that you're modifying. All right. So in this case, we just want to modify loading state from false to true when the app is loading, and when the app is done loading, we change it from true to false. So we can modify that directly from the reducer function itself. We don't need to pass any external data to it. So that's why this does not have any payload. All right, it just has type, and the type is loading start. Then we have another object here, under action objects. This one has type, also has payload, and the name of the type is store user event. I just named the store user event. It's a store user event, and this one accept payload because in this case we want to store user on the user state field. This field we want to update it, and if we want to update it, we need to update it with all of these fields like username, first name, email, and password. So we need to get this data from the user. So that is why this one requires payload. So this payload will be what the user will supply to us. When the user supply this payload to us, I will have to now pass this payload into this function, and it will now be used to update these states here. That's why this one has payload. This one is loading ends. In loading end, I don't need an external data. I just need to change the loading state from true to false. So there's no need for payload. And this is another object I added again. This one is called register user. You can see this register user, I need user to register the account. All right. So I call this, the type here is register user. It's a type of register user. And this one requires a payload because the user will provide their details. I will take their details and use it to update this users array field. This users array field we use this data here to update it. So we can't manufacture the data. The user needs to pass the data to us. So we get the user from data and use it to modify this field. All right. So where are we doing this modification I'm talking about? We are doing this modification inside reducer file. Here we can see that this state is basically the use context states, this one here that we want to modify. Good. And this action is the one I just explained on TypeScript. Remember, it has type, and payload, right? So using a switch statement, I'm targeting action.type. Action.type is simply, remember action, we said that action is a type of this declaration. So it has type, it has payload. So if you say action.type, you're going to have access to all of these types, like it's loading, store user, it's loading end, register user. That's why you have access to all of them when you do action.type. All right. So action.type, I say the first case I'm looking at is loading start, which is exactly this one. So it's loading start. So I'm saying that whenever whenever I call this function and pass a case of and pass a type, and the type is equals to is loading starts, what I just want to do is update. I'll return the previous states using the thread operator, returns the previous states in the states that, remember this state here. So what this simply means that if the type, when I declare this, when I invoke this function and I pass a case type of is loading starts, that I want to keep all of the data available here, here, and here, but I want to update the data here. So it's loading is what I want to update. That's why I returned everything using spread operator, keeping the state the way it is, but I want to update is loading, which is I just want to update this is loading field. So it's currently on false on the app initial state. I will change it to true. Then I said the second case I'm looking at is a case if the case is equals to store user, which is this one, is equals to store user, which is this one. Now, because this one is accepting payload, I'm getting information from the user directly. So I'm saying that if the action is equals to store user, I want to return every other available data in the state. So in this case, I'll be returning is loading users, but I want to modify user. All right. So that's why I have user. Then I'm just going to be passing, I'm going to be changing the value inside this user field. This user field currently is on the state of null. So I'm just going to be changing the value from null to whatever the user supplied to me. Action.payload is what is coming from the user. I'll show you how you pass all of these value as we continue watching this video. All right. So now we also have is loading end. The is loading end, simply what is loading end does is, if you look at the TypeScript here, you can see that it's loading end does not have a payload. All right. So we simply change is loading end to false. So what I'm simply saying is keep the state the way it is, but update only is loading field. So it's loading field, that means I will not touch this one. I'll retain the data the way it is. I also retain the data here, but this one value will change from whatever value it is at that current state to whatever value I pass into it. So in this case, I'm changing it to false back. All right, so that's what is going on here. Now also look at what is going on here. We have another event called register user. Register user simply is for register user. All right, so when I call this event, I just want to update users, this one, the array. Because it's an array, I want to add a user to it. That is register user. I want to add a user to it. So what I simply did here is to get the current state of the user by spreading all the current state of the user by state.users. All right. Remember that state.users is an array. State.users is simply state.users. Remember what I told you, that state here, this state here is simply this data. So when you do state.user, you have access to this. When you do state.isloading, you have access to this value. When you do state.users, you have access to this value, because you already passed this initial state data into this as second parameter. That's it. Hope that is clear. So we are simply saying now that we want to add user into that array. So to add a user into an array without removing the user that were there before, you simply access the previous array. Please do not update the array directly. Just access the previous array in a variable. Then now do current user.push. All right, current user.push will now be action.payload. Action.payload, remember, like I told you, is coming from the user. All right, it's coming from the user. The user is the one that is supplying this. So payload, if you look at the TypeScript file, register user has a payload, and the payload is a type of user attribute, which is simply we are asking user to provide their username, first name, email, and password. So when the user provides it, we'll just take the data the way it is and push it into this user array, which is simply state.users. In that case, we have already modified users array. So once we push the current user data here, we just modify the users array and just pass every of the array we have here into these users. That's simply what we are doing here. And if none of these cases are available, just return the state the way it is. That's basically what we are doing here. So I hope this is quite clear. Now let's see where this works in practical terms. We have a component folder here that allows us to register a user. Okay, and in this component, that's what we have here, register user. Now in this component, we have imported two components again. We imported the input component, we imported the button component. On the input component, we want the user to register first name, username, email, and password. Okay. However, we don't want to keep how many fields we have here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want to repeat this component 4 times, each of them representing each of these fields. It will be a lot of work. If you have 17 fields, are you going to repeat it 17 times? So the best thing you can do is to prepare an array that contains the value that you want the user, the fields that you want the user to provide. So basically first name, username, email, password, right? So you can prepare a data for it, and that's what we use dummy data like this for. Go to your data.js file. We just usually use it to prepare dummy data. So in this case, we have reg user data that is accepting first name, username, email, and password, right? And it has also been typed. If you look at the TypeScript file for this, I like the TypeScript for everything. So it's still the same. It's a type that has username, email, password, and first name. All right, good. So here we just declare that as an array. So we now have this as an array. We now have this as an array, reg user as an array. So if you go to registration components, which is what we have here. So we simply now imported reg user data, which remember we have it here. So instead of declaring these components one after the other, instead of declaring the input components one after the other, I just simply use map. Remember, we have all of the fields here, right? So map, using map, I just mapped and declared the input component once. Then the label, the input component is also a component that accepts some props. If you look at the input component here, it accepts a prop called label. All right. So the label will just simply display the name, whatever prop you pass into it. And if you look at the registration component, here, I am passing item into the label prop field. The label prop field accepts item. And what is actually item? Item is simply each of these items. So first name, username, email, and password. That's why you have all of this listed as first name, username, email, and password. All right, because we pass this value using map. We pass this value into each of the label field. Okay, so we have 4 items in the array, so this component will now be rendered 4 times. So this way, you just just declare the components once, and everything will work the way you want it to work. All right, the input component also has the div that is housing the input component should always accept the key props and just pass a unique value for your div into it. So usually pass index into it, or if the value you're mapping into has ID, pass the ID into it. All right, but they have to be unique. All right. Now I modify the input components a bit to contain some logic. If you look at the input component here, now it has new declarations. Okay, it has new declaration. The first declaration I added here is custom function and custom data. All right. So how do they work? Whenever you have an input in React, you'll be listening to an event called onChange for you to be able to capture whatever the user is typing here. So anything the user is typing here, user wants to type their name, you need to capture that. If you don't have an onChange event, you won't be able to capture that. Right? So with an onChange event, you can capture what the user is typing here. So that's why you can be able to have the user information that they are typing and use it to modify your state that you have. All right. So to do that, you have to use onChange. onChange is inbuilt in input. So you declare an onChange, and because you will be importing these components in different places, all right, you want to be able to pass the value of this onChange into the component you'll be importing it. To do that, we are expecting you to pass a custom function prop as part of the prop. All right, and what is that custom function doing? Look at this one. We have custom function props here. All right, and because it was declared as an optional prop, we need to tell TypeScript that it is a type of function to prevent it from showing us error. So we simply redeclare it here, declare function that it is equals to the custom function we pass as props, and we say it's a type of function. This way we'll avoid the error from TypeScript. All right. So all we just simply did here is we said declare function is equals to, we declare this function that we pass from the component where we invoked input component. We are declaring it here, and we are simply passing the text value and custom data into it. All right. Custom data is also a prop. It's an optional prop, and is the data type is unknown. All right. We'll see how that works. Okay. So we simply just invoke the function. This is basically what JavaScript also does under the hood for you. All right. So we just invoke the function, and we passing the value of text value and custom data into it. And what is this text value? This text value is simply when I declare this function, I said it's accepting one argument. Please, you can see the argument is extremely important part of React. A lot of the things you will be doing in React deals with parameters, which is basically what React called props or arguments, whatever you call it. That's what it simply means. So when I created this function, I have an argument here called props. The props, which is going to be a text value here, and this text is going to be a string. And what is this? When I declare this function, onChange is a function, it's a function event in input from React that you can use to access the value that the user is passing. So you can see this is a function. This E here simply is coming from React. So if you say e.currentTarget.value, you are simply accessing this value. That's it. It is inbuilt in React. This is just how it is. It is inbuilt in React. So if you say E, so now this argument I have here, I am changing the values from null state to this. So this is why I have access to text. So you can console log this to see exactly what's going on here. So e.currentTarget.value becomes whatever I type on this field. Whatever I type on this field is passed into text value, which is this. All right. And I take this that has been passed into this text value and pass it into the function that is coming from anywhere input component is declared and the custom function is called. So whenever custom function is called, I pass this text value that is coming from the input text, which is whatever I type on the input box here, I pass it to that function. I'm also going to be passing custom data into that function so I can access it. All right, so let's see how this works in registration component. If you go to registration component, I call the input component and I pass a type of text. However, if you look at this now, password is also visible, which we don't want. All right, so if we want to fix that, we can write a condition for it. So we can say if item is equals to password. All right, this is password item. Remember, item is all of this data file here. So I'm saying if the item is equals to this, then I want to change the type. Instead of making it text, if it's equals to password, then I want to change it to password. However, else it should be text. Now this way, if I check this place now, I can see the password has not been identified as password. This is no longer visible. Okay, so you can do that as well. So when I declare this input component here, I am passing these two props, custom function, which remember we just added to the TypeScript of input component, right? And custom data, which we give us access because it's unknown, so I can pass in data from here. So custom function, I want to write a function that will be invoked by inputs. So that function I pass here, the function I pass into the register components here will be invoked. This is where it was invoked. Handle inputs. This is the name of the function. Handle inputs. So this is handle input. This is a function. So all of this function was not invoked. Remember, you need to invoke a function when you call the bracket, right? So it was not invoked. When we pass it here, we didn't invoke it. So it was not invoked. So we passed this function into custom function, which is a prop that's coming from input components. And when you go to input components, we now invoke that function. This is that function, custom function. All right, we declared it here, so it's a type of function. Then what did we do here? I just declared the function. It was invoked here, and while invoking it, I passed the value that I was getting from here into it. I also passed whatever value I pass as custom data into it, so that when I'm writing the function, I can access it. All right, now when you go to the register component, you can see the handle input function, which I simply pass into custom function here. Okay, good. So now you see it here. So text value is the first argument. The first argument is text value, which is the first argument that was passed here. So the first argument, which is text value, is simply whatever I'm typing here is the first argument. And the second argument is the value coming from custom data. Where is this custom data coming from? If you check your register component again, you will see where I pass. This is custom data. So for custom data, I'm just passing the names of this individual item. That is good. That's what my logic requires. So it depends on what your own logic requires. If my logic requires these items because I want to use it to know exactly when the user is typing in the email box or when the user is typing on the username field or email or password field. This is what will help me. So when the user clicks here, I will pass the name, first name. Remember, each of this item here is simply the name coming from the registration data that we already prepared here. All right, that's it. Hope all of this is making sense to you. Okay, so now you have access to. So now here I can say event, created a very called event, says custom data, which is the second argument. Second argument is custom data, which is simply this second argument, this one here. Okay, so I'm saying custom data is a type of register user attributes. Register user attributes, you know what that is? It is exactly what we are using. Is username, email, password, and first name, which is exactly what we pass in here, right? What we pass in here. Perfect. So I'm saying that it is equals to that. So if event, which is this, is equals to email, this will make me know that the user is typing inside the email box here. If it's equals to email, I want to update a state. Now, this is introducing you to another thing called use state. The use state here is like the use reducer that we talked about. Okay, so because we want to update these objects, email, password, first name, or username, we declare the component state. This is the component state. It cannot be available to other components except you pass it as a prop. All right, so it's only available to this component here, registration component. All right, so you declare the use state. When you declare the component state, it's recommended for you to use use state. For instance, there are other states you can use, but we recommend you use this one. So we created an object called email. This will hold the data that the user type inside the email field here, to hold the data the user type here. And we created another field called password. This will hold the whatever value user type here to hold it. And we created another value called first name and username. All of this will hold these ones. All right, so if you console log this now, let's console log this and say console.log reg user state. If you console log reg user state and check what's going on in your browser, you can see an object. Can you see? Email is containing this, first name is containing this, password is containing this, username is containing this. That's the magic. So that is what this object does for you. And like I explained to you about use reducer, this is a use state from React. It's a hook from React as well that helps us to manage states. The first element in the array is the states. And the second element here is the function that updates the state. Please, you can name these things anything you like. They can be named anything you like. So whatever name you like, you name them. It's just variable declaration. So just know that the first element is the state. The second element is the function that modifies the states. That is how it is also with use reducer. This is how it is with use states. Both of them are state management hooks in React. All right. So we want to, at the initial state of our application, email, password, first name are all empty string. but we want to update this state each time the user types something here. So anytime the user type this something here, you can see, if you look at the object now, can you see empty, empty, just the way it is here. I just refer the just the way it is like this, empty, right? So we want to update each of these fields anytime the user type on this field, but we want to know when the user type on first name, when the user type on username, and all of that thing. That was why we pass a custom data that contains each of the time the user put his start typing on any of the fields. So you can see as I start typing on first name, if you check this now, you can see that first name now has this AA that we have here. All right. So that is exactly what's going on here. So how do we know what's going on here? Check out event. If you go to events, okay, let's see what happens when this function is invoked. This function is invoked only when the user types here. So if you type here now, I just typed A, you can see that event is giving me first name. This is what makes me to know his first name that the user is updating. Let me delete this one. If I type here now, the event is giving me username. This is what makes me to know that the user is actually typing on username. So I can now say that if event is equals to email, that is, if event is equals to this email, I want to update this email field. So to do that, using the set reg user, the set user states, which I said update this state, I can say set user, remember is an object, all right? I want to return all the state that were there before. I'm not modifying any other state aside email. So I want to return every other state that was there before. Then I want to change the value of email. I'm changing the value of email from whatever it was, I'm adding text value to it. So I'm adding text value to email. If it is equal to first name, the same thing, password, the same thing. So by the time I'm done, that's why when you are not done registering all of this, if I do proper registration here, let's say my name is Kingsley. Let's say my username is Kings19. Let's say my password is kings@gmail.com. And let's say my password is 123. So when you check reg states, remember these states. Remember everything that is happening here is to update these states, right? Reg states, right? So let's look at what is happening in reg states. Let console.log reg states. If you look at reg states now, everything you have here is all you have here, because this function gets called each time a user types on this field. And what is making this possible is the function called onChange event from React. OnChange event is what is handling this. And onChange event is called when I invoke this function. When I invoke this function, and this function is simply invoking this function that was written here. Look at this function that was written here, was passed into this as props, and it was invoked. This is exactly what's happening here. So very straightforward indeed, and that's what is going on. So now that you have the reg state data, you have all your data. The user has finished providing all the data they want for registration. You now want to update the user states. This state here, users. You want to register this user into this array. Let's look at what is actually the current state of the application. If you go here, let's check our user. If you go here and check user, look at user. It's an empty array. All right. Users, empty array, because we've not updated it. Okay. So what we want to do now is that this user that has provided this information, when he clicks this button, we want to add that user into this user array. So how is this going to happen? We created another function called register user function. This register user function is invoked when this button is clicked. When you click on this button. All right. When you click on this button. Now that you click on this button, we want to simply register this user. And how did we click on this button? We created another component called button. Button component. This button component here, let's look for it. Button component. Okay, this button component. So what this button component does is simply return it. So we can use this button anywhere, even in login page, you can use it in login page. So it simply is doing the same thing that the other one is doing. It accepts an onClick event. Look at onClick events. Remember onClick event in JavaScript we stated two events now: on change events, on click events. On change events happens when you type inside the input box. On click event happens when you click on something, maybe an element or button or text. So we are telling JavaScript that whenever a user clicks on this button, we want to invoke a function. And what we just want to invoke is this function. And what this function simply does is invoking this function called declare function event. Declare function event is simply coming from onClick function. Please, onClick function is coming from this props passed into button component, just like we did in input component. Let's check out what is inside the button component type. Okay, if you go to button component type, look at it. We are accepting button text and we are accepting onClick function. It's a type of function. All right. So if you go back to button component here, so we are destructuring the button text and also destructuring the function we passed in here. All right. So now we just declare that function here. All right. So if no, okay, we can simply say if no declared function, then we can return this. All right. So if this function was not passed and the button was clicked, then we don't want to perform any action. All right, that's exactly what we are saying. But if the function was passed in the button component and the button was clicked, so we want to invoke the function. And what is this function we are invoking? Is this function prop that we passed here? And when do we pass it? If you go to registration components, we have a button component and we have onClick function here. Remember onClick function? Exactly the one that we have here. OnClick function, exactly, good. So that's what we have here. So onClick function is simply we are passing this function as prop to it. And what is this function here? This function is simply this function. And what is this function doing? This function is simply registering this user. It's simply doing this logic here. And what is this logic? The first thing we want to do is that we want to register this user into the users array, but we want to ensure that the user does not exist first. So we want to find the user first. So to find the user, we want to say state.users.find, state.users using the array method find. Remember, the find method returns the first element in the array that matches your condition. So what is the condition? We are saying item.email if, remember, this use state here contains users, right? That contain username, first name, past name, and all of that, right? So we are saying that find the user that matches, okay, find the user that the, okay, illustration component. So find the user that the email matches the email that is available on the reguserstate.email. Reguserstate is simply this state. And remember that this state here, we are populating or updating this state here using this function here. So we want to check if the email the user has provided is already found inside the users array. If it's not found inside the users array, if it's found inside the users array, don't do anything. But if it's not found, that's why we're returning it. But if it's not found inside the user array, we want to update the user array field. And this is how we update the user array field. Remember, I told you that the dispatch function is used to update the user state, right? So you call the dispatch function. It has been imported here. Dispatch function here have been imported. How did you import the dispatch function? When you go to this place here, you can see where it was imported. This is where I imported it. So you create a create a value, a variable, an object variable. All right. Then the object variable will be equals to use context. Use context is coming from React. Look at it, coming from React. And you can now pass your global use context into it. The global use context is coming from here. This global use context. And inside this global use context, what do we have? We have states, we have dispatch, all right? Which is basically this use reducer here. That's basically what it is. Okay, so we want to access this. Just pass your global use context into this. So with that, you can access the state and dispatch because we just have state and dispatch exactly here, right? So with this now, and we also pass it here. This was making it available for the whole components, all right? So with this now, if you declare the dispatch, it's a function that accepts certain parameters. It's accepting type. Remember, it's accepting type because when we created reducer function, remember the reducer function here, this user function here accepts two parameters, the state and the action. All right, the action is exactly what we are interested in. If you go to this place, we have different action. We have register user action, and we say whenever the action is equals to register user, we want to perform this logic. So we will just want to push whatever the user passed to us into the current user array. All right, just pass into the current user array. Okay, so if you look at the registration button again, function again, you can see that we declare the dispatch and we declare the type. You have to declare the type. It's a type of register user. That means it's a type of this action here, and it's expecting action.payload. Okay, it's expecting you to pass payload into action.payload. All right, so to do that, you can now declare payload. Where is this payload coming from? Payload is coming from here. Remember, register user has type, register user, payload here, and we say payload is going to be a type of user attribute, which is username, first name, email, and password, right? So we are simply saying that we are now passing reg user state, which is simply all of these states here that user has provided their email, password, username. That means if you look at it here, all of these things that user has provided here, we want to dump it into the users array. All right. So this case now, we just pass reg user state into this. So now that this has been passed here, reg user state has been declared as the action. That dispatch will go and trigger this function. When you trigger this function, it will look at all of these cases and find which action did you declare. In this case, we declared reg user. So it's going to perform all of this action here. So what it's going to do is it will run this code, this line of code first. It first of all got all the users that are inside this state.users already. That's this state.users already, right? It has access to them here. Now it pushed this action.payload. Action.payload is simply this reg user, which is all of this value coming from this state here. So it simply passed all of that into current user variable. After it passed it there, then it modified the users field, which is this users field. All right, that's exactly what it's doing here. So if we check what is going on here, look at it here. The users array is empty at this state. So now if you click register, what happens? You can see users array has been populated. You now have that user. Look at this user we have here now. We now have it here. If you want to register this user again, it will not work because I already have the user registered. Look at it. If I click on enter, it's not registering again because the user has been registered already. Because look at the function that handles that. On registration component, we are simply saying that before you register the user, check if the user is available. If the user is available, then return. That means don't do anything. If the user is available, that means don't do anything. That's what it simply means. All right, so that's why nothing happens here. So if I change this user now to, let's say, David19, that's another user, david@gmail.com. Can you send password? We're not checking password, just email. So if I click register now, what do we have? You can see two users inside the user field, two. So that's how you can, if you register this same user again, you not register. So this is how you've registered this user. Now, can I have this user in dashboard? Yes. If I create another link on, this is registration, right? Let's drop a link. Let's call it p tag. Let's call it dashboard. All right. On this dashboard, let's call it dashboard, and let's make it a link, calling the React link component from React Router DOM. The link component from React Router DOM is accepting this property here. So it has a prop called tool, and this tool, let's take it to dashboard. So this way we can navigate to dashboard. So if when we navigate to dashboard, let's see if we can still have this user that we have here. All right, so you can see dashboard. So we click on dashboard, it takes us to dashboard, right? Good. So let's go to dashboard. This dashboard component. Good. Let's do console.log here. So before we do that, we need to access the state, right? To access the state, we need to do const empty object that is equals to use context from React. Use context is coming from React, and there we can pass accept a parameter call. We can pass our global context state. In this case, this is the global context state. This one, that the one we created. It can be any name. You can name it anything you like. All right. So just pass that. So now that we pass that, we can have access to this state and this dispatch. Remember that I said this state is simply this state. All right. And we'll be modifying it without dispatch. So we can call state. We can as well separate it out, comma, then we can have access to dispatch. All right. So in this case now, let's console log and call state. All right. So let's dashboard. So let's see if we can you see when you declare states, you can see it's loading is false, user is null, but users field is still available. All of those fields you registered there still available. Good. So this is how global state works.